Great. Well, welcome everyone. From the sounds of silence in the background, it sounds like everyone is muted, which is great. That's really going to be kind of necessary for us to do this effectively with the number of people we have in here. First of all, really excited you could join us. This is going to be a helpful and insightful session, I think. Just a couple technical details. You should have seen an email with some of these, but I'll go over them quickly. Please do stay muted throughout. Again, the size of the gathering here makes it so that that's kind of necessary to be effective. We are going to utilize the chat function. So on the bottom of your screen, I think most people have used Zoom before, but there's a little kind of word bubble icon. If you have questions for the presenters throughout the session, use that. We have some RRCA staff on here that's going to be monitoring it, including myself, and we'll be able to relay those questions to the presenters. Keep an eye on it as well. We're going to try to keep this kind of tight and focused on some specific new areas, but Mike Webb, our membership manager who's on the call, also may be able to offer you some resources in the chat too related to questions that you ask. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to our executive director, Jean Kanak, who will do an introduction to this session.
And it's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So thank you all for joining us. As Andy said, we're recording this, so we'll be able to share it out. You'll be able to share it with members within your organization as well if they have questions. So I don't want to take too much time, but I will say I went to Fort Wayne, Indiana in September to dig into the details for the insurance policy renewal with Trent and Terry. And as Terry says, I always, beat them up and try to get the best deal possible. And as we all know, this has been a rather challenging year for all of us. And so learning about where the insurance industry is at, please put yourself on mute. Learning where the insurance industry is at, we thought it would be best to bring in the policy underwriters. So for everybody on the phone, just a very brief overview. Trent and Terry are the brokers that work predominantly, please put yourself on mute, that work with our underwriters. And oh my goodness.
Please, reminder, please, everybody, for this to work effectively, you have to stay on mute while you're in this room.
Okay, sorry, we're going to keep moving forward. So we thought it would be critical to bring on the underwriting team at K&K, who the policy that we have for the organization is actually through that insurance entity. So I'm going to introduce, we have Jason, Lee, Phil, and Dan. And so we are going to have each one of them introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their role at K&K. And Jason, I'll start with you.
Good morning, everyone. As Jean mentioned, I'm Jason Thrash. I'm with K&K Insurance. I'm actually a senior underwriter for the sports division at K&K. So I am the desk production underwriter for the RRCA account. I have been in the mix with the Roadrunners for many years, but prior to taking over the account myself, I did assist in a supervisory role. But like I said, I'm the underwriter, the day-to-day person. I work closely with Margaret and Trent and Terry, as far as any program issues or processing needs. I work with Phil Hartman and some other folks in our sports division. In turn, we work with our carrier partner to develop the insurance program for Roadrunners. And we've all felt it's been very successful to date, but with the challenges that are arising for the renewal, like Jean mentioned, we thought it would be a great idea to jump on a call, kind of run through the state of things, and then allow for any questions or concerns to be expressed. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, Jason. Phil, I'm going to go to you.
Sure. Okay. Yes, my name is Phil Hartman. I am the underwriting manager in the sports division. I've been at K&K long enough to remember when we first wrote the RRCA account, which is 20 plus years ago. So we do thank you for your business and continued relationship and so forth. And I think during that time, we've gone through the Y2K, terrorism, sexual abuse, For us, concussions, which, really doesn't get involved in the running events, but now we're looking at the COVID and some of the challenges that we have with that. So we look forward to talking with you today, kind of give you an idea of our position, and as well give you some information, practical information on safety tips and loss control. So, thank you.
Awesome. All right, Dan, I'm going to you next.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Eisenberger. I am the a claim manager for about 15 years. I handled the claims and was a claim lit analyst, and have handled a number of RRCA club claims and lawsuits over the years. Over the last year, I've moved into the management role on the claim side. So I would be involved in overseeing if there are claims that come in for RRCA, be involved in overseeing the handling of those claims.
Awesome. Whoops. I did not mean to do that, Lee. I muted you. So Lee, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I'm Lee Geiling. I am the loss control manager for K&K Insurance. My role with K&K is to actually go out into the field and visit certain of major events, client facilities, those types of things, to give the underwriters kind of a fair and balanced overview of what's going on at our insured facilities. I've been around sports and entertainment for a long time, and I do these visits. I also create some bulletins, try and help the underwriters out as much as I can. So that's kind of my role, if you will.
Awesome. And Dan, after you introduce yourself, I know that we've spoken several times through the last 15 years. Okay, I'm going to turn this over now to Trent and Terry, and they're going to talk a little bit about where the policy is at for the year, and then we'll have our friends from K&K also provide a lot more detail to everybody.
Thanks, Gene. Welcome, everybody. A lot of familiar faces. I'm sure a lot of you recognize me since I've been doing this for about 35 years for the RRCA and been in front of you every year for the conventions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make that happen this last year. Needless to say, from an insurance standpoint, it's been a really, really tough year. And from an RRCA standpoint, it's been a really, really tough year. And, we've seen the development of virtual events that, kind of change things up from our standpoint, from a liability standpoint with the RRCA and how to handle those. And I think Gene navigated those waters pretty good for us. Trent and myself have really been involved in this COVID-19 mess, not only from an RRCA standpoint, but from our just standard clients we insure, here in Fort Wayne. I can kind of speak firsthand. This is my first day back after 10 days of isolation. My wife and I both were diagnosed with COVID-19 about 2 weeks ago. And so I will be real honest with you. Trent would verify this, that, in the early stages, I thought, this really isn't that big of a deal. I think they're really making a lot to do about nothing. I think it's just, a bad case of the flu. And I've lived it the last 10 days, and it is a lot different than the flu. I will say that. Quite frankly, I think my wife and I probably had pretty mild cases in comparison to things that we've seen with other people. But my wife did make the comment that this is as sick as she has seen me for many, many years. We've been married 40 years. So it's real, needless to say, and I'll admit that now. As I said, I was one of those that really didn't see a big deal about it when this first started. We did meet with Gene back in September. Gene flew into Fort Wayne, and we had ongoing negotiations regarding the renewal of the policy, the rating structure for this upcoming year. And of course, the big topic with the renewal has to do with COVID-19. And as race directors or people that are putting on events, your exposures to this, how's that exposure going to be treated by insurance? And it was a good meeting. I think that, you know, we did negotiate other parts of the contract. And really, I think that things from a liability standpoint and the major programs that we have for the RRCA, really none of that changed much. We were able to add coverage this year for the clubs if they're going to have track and field events. That's a new feature that if you're having a running event that is including some track and field events, you'll now be able to get coverage through the RRCA. Once again, a tough negotiator, Gene, was able to get that put together. Bottom line is the major topic that we need to discuss is the coronavirus. And needless to say, recently with the surge in coronavirus cases, we were hoping that maybe back in September, things were starting to settle down, and looking into 2021, you know, maybe things would kind of make a turn the other way. Needless to say, that's all changed. And Gene felt it was really important that we at least let the insurance carriers themselves, the people that underwrite the policies, the people that price the policies, you know, address you today with your concerns regarding the effects of coverage going forward, and how, from a loss control standpoint, you'll be able to deal with the coronavirus looking into 2021. We really hope that we'd be having more events and not the virtual events, but I think probably in the early part of 2021, once again, I think that's probably been that's probably a wish that's not going to come true. So really at this point, Trent and I, you know, we're here to answer your questions at any time regarding the guts, the basic general liability policy of the RRCA, but we've really brought the experts in to address the coronavirus issue and the effects that's going to have going forward for the RRCA. So Gene, maybe turn it back to you.
Yeah, let's, one of the big conversations that we had when we were in Fort Wayne, and Jason, I think between you and Phil, your explanation, that's why I really wanted to do this, because I knew you could explain it much better than I could. So why don't you guys start with where the policy stands as it relates to pandemics? We know COVID is a disease, a virus that, would fall under a pandemic spectrum. So Jason, if you want to talk a little bit about how the policy is going to view COVID moving forward, and, kind of everything that people need to know from there.
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute there. Obviously, the entire situation is been a shock to everyone. It's a new hurdle for all facets of everyone's life. I mean, beyond just the insurance coverage, the day-to-day impact and changes that COVID-19 has presented have been, almost undescribable. Prior to this virus appearing, insurance policies did not typically have a direct exclusion for any sort of communicable disease, loss, or claim. As the situation got worse, things started shutting down, insurance marketplace as a whole. I think they were, trying their best to grasp the situation, clarify the intent of policies, coverage. We've seen a lot of, claims and inquiries for not only liability, but also folks that would have property coverage that would have, a business income element. There's losses that, have taken place. Like, for instance, we write a lot of minor league baseball teams. There was no minor league baseball play this year. The entire minor league organization shut down all league play for the calendar year. That triggered a lot of, panic and issues for the minor league baseball teams. So again, this has just been a very fluid situation all the way around. Prior to the upcoming policy renewal, there would have been coverage for a communicable disease related claim, by virtue of there being a lack of an exclusion, if you will. But our carrier partner, which is Nationwide, they have obviously reviewed the, the situation. They've, the powers that be have determined that, all of K&K's business and programs moving forward into calendar year 2021, really dating back to probably, Phil would back me up on this, but I believe roughly starting in May, we had a mandatory directive from the carrier to anything moving forward, there would have to be a communicable disease, exclusion. Now we have two tools or two endorsements, if you will, that would accomplish this. One is much, sorry, I'm getting someone picking up. One of the options is more of an absolute exclusion. And then we also have a broader form that provides more coverage, and it strictly limits the intent of the exclusion to any epidemic or pandemic situation that has been deemed such by the Centers of Disease Control or the World Health Organization. So if you've got, let's say, a MRSA outbreak in a localized area, that wouldn't be deemed to be a pandemic or an epidemic. So something like that is not in scope with this endorsement. But the logical connection point would be the intent to remove coverage for any COVID-19 related loss, because that it certainly has been deemed to be, a pandemic by the various organizations that have the authority to do that. So, we've gone back and forth with the carrier many ways and times and on many different accounts. But the reality is that this is a mandatory position of our carrier for all K&K business and programs. We do intend to include the broader form on the Roadrunners program. So it would be limited to a pandemic or epidemic, related situation. So again, COVID-19 would be in scope with that. We personally feel like it would be a challenge for somebody to come after an event organizer or anybody for that matter to say, I contracted the virus from your event and you're at fault for that. Again, with the situation being so new, folks are certainly going to try to do that, and as Dan may speak to, have. But again, we think the legality issue there would be a challenge, and but the uncertainty is the big, I guess, issue for the carrier. You don't know how much, how many, how much defense costs would be involved. There could be one claim on an account, there could be 100. It's just one of those situations where it's really uncharted territory for all of us. There's, I know in the 1920s, there was another similar situation, but up until then, we haven't had a similar phenomena happening in the country where the insurance world has had to take a very quick reevaluation of things and try to clarify the intent of things, within the policy language itself. So that's where the communicable disease exclusion comes in. Again, it's not our intent to have, minor things be excluded from coverage, but, the carrier is wanting to be clear that, a COVID-19 related loss or allegation would not be in the scope of coverage for the renewal policy starting, 12/31 of 2020.
So Jason, now that we've shared that news, talk a little bit about, because I know we talked in September, that if somebody does file a claim, if they say, I contracted it at this race, we talked in September that you guys have a process for at least working through those, and maybe Dan and Lee might have some insight onto how that process would be managed.
Yeah, I think we'd always defend an insured up until it was deemed that there was not coverage for the issue at hand. Dan, I don't know if he's got any real life COVID liability, examples that he could give us or run through. But yeah, Dan would be in a good position to, kind of describe how the claims handling aspect would happen if there was a suit or an allegation made.
I mean, at this point, fortunately, I've not seen any claim that's come in on a general liability side that has alleged, I contracted it, through, going to your facility, your race, your venue, or whatever. So without that exclusion on there, I guess that's without, an exclusion that we would defend the insured, there may be, I could foresee a potential that there might be an allegation that, you held this event and you knew that, you were inviting a lot of people, maybe in violation of a health organization's, recommendations. So there's the potential that the expected intended exclusion on the GL, which, applies regardless of whether you had the virus exclusion or not, that a carrier might reserve rights on that. But again, that's not come up. And I would think that it's pretty unlikely that they would flat out deny on those grounds. So again, up until that exclusion hits, that we would defend primarily. Again, every case is different and the facts, will ultimately determine that, whether there's coverage, and from my perspective, I think that I would look into, are you following the guidelines that are set forth by, the local, the state health organization, because again, then you're looking to see, is there liability out there? And, on its face, to me, it would seem like it would be somewhat difficult unless you had an event where maybe, multiple people have come down with it, but trying to pin it on one particular place when these people have been other places that could potentially contract it. So I think a lot, pinning liability might be difficult, but for purposes of defense, that would be big until that, until 12/31.
Thanks, Dan. Let's see here.
I don't know if Phil would want to add anything as well. I know he was involved in some of the dialogue with Gene and the renewal.
Yeah.
Phil, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add on to.
Well, just a little further on the carrier's position, I think, and Jason and Dan did a beautiful job explaining this, but we are a bit hamstrung with the carrier. I mean, they've made, this exclusion to be an absolute. I mean, we're looking at, over 11 million of diagnosed cases and 250,000 deaths. But I think the biggest fear, and learning from our experience on sexual abuse and concussion and so forth, is the class action suit. And some of these events could be, considered as a super spreader, I guess, where, not only would the virus be spread among, just the participants at the event, but then, some of the participants could go see a mother at the nursing home or, go to another event and spread it in that fashion. And with the advent of contact tracing and so forth, it appears that, that can be linked back to, I guess, a focal point or, a certain place where, the virus may have I'm not sure what word to come up with, but started, I guess. So, I think that the exclusion is there to, avoid, a multiple of claims. We can handle 1, 2, whatever, an event number of claims. But, it's just would be devastating to the carrier. It would be devastating to the industry. There are many carriers who are excluding this coverage, until, we can pretty much understand where we're going with it, until, a vaccine is approved by the FDA and we have, a lot more certainty as to what the exposure really is.
And Phil, when we were talking before we started the Zoom, one of the things that we were discussing, and I think Jason, you were talking about that too, was that, an event is going to be different than a hard venue where they maybe have a lot more control over comings and goings. And so, talk a little bit about, if there are insurance agents that are saying, oh, we can cover, for COVID, but, kind of within that light of, there is a difference between a road race held out in a public domain that doesn't have the same control abilities as, a hard structure.
Yeah, no, that is correct. I mean, in our opinion, it's all about, negligence is sort of based around, what is reasonable, what duty did you have and what is reasonable in providing that duty. And, Lee, our loss control manager, he's put together some bulletins. I believe he's actually working on one for a running event, sort of, best practices. But we would agree that if you're a health club or, an organization or entity that's got a defined premise, a location, day-to-day operations take place at one defined premises, you're going to have a much higher duty of, making sure things are have been sanitized, cleaned, make sure there's, procedures in place, traffic control when it comes to folks coming in and out. You want to certainly be in compliance with any local or state requirements as far as, crowd size, that sort of thing. But when you have a running event, it's a little bit different. You're typically loading up maybe the day before or sometimes day of, you're building out the event. You then on a Friday, you're going to have the event on a Saturday, maybe a post race gathering thereafter. And then you vacate the premise, later that day or maybe the next day. So we're talking a couple days at a park or a city square or something along those lines where, an event member or a member club does not have the same, level of duty to provide, all of the things. But, as far as cleanliness and making sure, like as Gene said, you don't have the same level of control when you're just a tenant at a park or, at a track, at a high school or whatever the case may be. So, but with that, you still want to be, trying to do your best to protect the participants, to do things that are reasonable, to have, order to the event. I mean, you don't want to have, 500 people jammed in at the starting line at once. I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty commonsensical, but, we feel, if there is, if everyone is doing what they can to mitigate things. I mean, again, Terry's unfortunately came down with it. He probably doesn't know exactly where he got it. So again, these things are, it's really difficult to pin it down on a specific, club or event or situation. But, from a loss control perspective, if you can document the things that you have been doing, to mitigate the risk as best as you can. I see there's been some questions about, the COVID waiver language. There is waiver release language that can be added that addresses, the COVID situation. Again, a waiver does not absolve anybody of liability. We would like to believe that is the case, but it's more of a defense mechanism. In the event of a lawsuit, you have something that says the participant agreed to this. They were aware of the situation prior to, and they willfully, signed off on participating in light of, the hazards that may be present. So, but a waiver doesn't preclude somebody from suing, or does not preclude somebody for, being awarded a judgment in a situation that there's a loss. But again, having a strong waiver that addresses the COVID situation is another tool or another, feather in the cap of, trying to run an organized and event, trying to do your best to keep folks safe. I mean, you go to the grocery store, you go to, Walmart or whatever the case may be. I mean, it's, that they have a much higher, there's touch points, there's, traffic control that needs to take place there. We would just, and the information that Lee will provide will be helpful in this manner, but just doing the the basic things, the common sense things, and being able to document them in the event there were to be a claim or a situation arise. It's, it's much like anything else. I mean, you would, when you're designing a course for an event, you want to make sure you're, using, the appropriate streets or trails. And I mean, it goes all along with the total event planning. I mean, it's just another area or aspect that would need to be, addressed. But again, we're not, of the belief that an event owner has the same level, of responsibility that somebody who's running a health club would, as far as sanitation and all of those things are concerned. But again, if there's a baseline that everyone's, trying to do their best, again, that goes a long way along with the waiver. And if there were to be a claim to say, look, I mean, the club or the organization did everything that was reasonable and prudent for them to do. So, by virtue of that, this is not necessarily something where they were negligent or at fault for.
Hey, Jason, I'm just jumping real quick. Gene, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I mean, the big thing with insurance companies is being able to underwrite exposures and kind of have forecasting and history and data to underwrite those exposures. I mean, I think back to kind of when terrorism became a thing and, they excluded that. And then ultimately down the road, you were able to purchase it back for a price. I don't know, Jason, you may think differently or Phil, but I think there'll probably be a point in time where something is available and out there at a cost for a pandemic. It's just right now, there's just not enough information. There's not enough legislation out there for these insurance companies to feel comfortable enough to just include that coverage again, because it would be the wild, wild west. And, as a program, for the RRCA, the last thing we want to do is jeopardize the program by paying a ton of claims for something specifically like this, and then potentially not have a carrier to jump on for the RRCA down the road. So I hope, the fear is not, or the thought is not to put you into fear. We want events to happen. We want you guys to have events. We truly believe, as Jason said, that if you're taking all necessary, putting controls in place to limit that exposure, obviously it's difficult not having a specific premise where you're having it at, but if you're doing all those things, hopefully you're protected. Again, it's pretty difficult for somebody to prove that they contracted it in a specific spot. But again, I think, that's just where we're at from an insurance standpoint. There's just no way to underwrite for it at this point in time. Insurance companies put reserves out there. And, if COVID claims start to be paid just kind of free for all, it would probably bankrupt the insurance industry as a whole within, the next few years. And that's just as an industry where we're at right now.
Yeah, again, it's the unknown and the newness of it all. Again, as Trent alluded to, there's much smarter people than I that are actuarially looking at information. They're trying to project and forecast what, a pool of similar insurance, how they will perform as a whole. And with this being such a brand new issue, I don't think that there's the capability for that. Now, Trent also brought up a great point in that this does appear to be, I can't speak to what will happen down the road. I certainly wish I had a crystal ball for more than just this reason, but it would seem that as this situation plays out, I do think this is a temporary issue as far as coverage is concerned. Now, I don't know if it's we get to the point where it's an optional, like terrorism, where you can purchase it back, or if, once there's, the vaccines have hit and, there's a high percentage of the population that's had them, maybe the insurance companies will now feel differently about the exposure. It is really tough to say, but I would, my opinion, and I'm by no means an expert, but I have, worked in the sports, leisure, and insurance world for pushing 15 years. I would say that this, it does parallel the terrorism issue pretty well, in that initially once, 9/11 happened, there was, the coverage was not available. The government had to enact some protections, and then it became an option to buy it back, through the government's program. It's hard to say exactly how that will play out for COVID, but I do think, if we're talking 2 5 years down the road, I don't think we'll still be having, this conversation, because hopefully, the issue has, played itself out. Now, once an exclusion becomes part of a program's DNA, if you will, sometimes it is difficult to get those, removed, but I do think there'll be much more flexibility as things play out. And the insurance companies and the actuaries and the folks that are really, looking at the macro level data are able to see and make some, accurate or at least semi-educated guesses on how this will play out. I mean, as Dan alluded to, he has not seen a big influx of liability-related claims related to COVID. We've also seen, and again, every insurance is an interesting beast because every, state's got their own Department of Insurance. Everybody's got, some quirks or some things that are applicable on a, real localized basis, from state to state. So, how one state views something is different than how another state, some of that follows our political lines pretty closely, as you can imagine. But we have found that there are, municipalities, or there are legislative groups that are looking to protect, organizations and businesses from these types of lawsuits. And we're hopeful that, those efforts would continue across the board. I don't know how many states offhand, have these protections in place, but I am aware that a few states have, started to enact things that basically say, you can't sue Walmart for thinking you've got the, the virus there, or whoever the case may be. So, those things, along with the continued progression of the vaccines, and then again, as we, it's obviously reared its head again, but hopefully as we get into the springtime and those things have been out for a while, hopefully the issue will, sort of resolve itself to some degree, when it comes to COVID-19 in particular. And then once that has come and gone, the exclusion as it's worded today would be, again, for another COVID-19 related situation. So, again, we've only seen one of these in our lifetime. Let's hope it's the only one. But I know, and I can't speak to when the last time, the World Health Organization deemed something to be a global pandemic. But so again, that's really what we're looking at once we're through the COVID situation. If the exclusion were to remain, it's very laser focused in that it's only for these very, catastrophic level issues that are out there, like COVID-19.
And Jason, one of the questions, and I kind of have seen this scroll past a little bit, like it's, 100 people on a chat isn't always easy to follow, but, walk us through, say somebody holds an event, they've got COVID on the waiver, maybe they've asked a few questions of participants in advance, they've done a really great job with sanitation, limiting touch points, doing some masks required at start finish, but somebody still files a claim. Obviously the big part of insurance is that defense piece when a claim is filed. So, is that an automatic, not even going to look at it? Where does a member go if that happens in that scenario?
I think with the thing with a potential claim scenario that, everyone needs to keep in mind is, how different each and every situation can be. I mean, it's hard to, throw a blanket over any one, potential situation or how something occurred. And I think Dan would be helpful on this question as well. But yes, I mean, the insurance company's got a duty to defend and insure until it is deemed by, coverage counsel or the claim examiner that, the nature of the allegation or the suit, the policy explicitly does not provide coverage. So, I guess there would be, every claim is going to have its individual merits and situations and circumstances, and they would certainly be reviewed on a case by case basis. But, once it was deemed to be a COVID related loss, after 12/31, once the claims folks determine that, this is a COVID related claim and the policy has, the explicit exclusion, the defense at that point in time would cease.
I mean, the pre 12/31, like, you know, if you're looking at the policies now, if you had events, you know, before that specific exclusion takes effect, as long as there's nothing else in the suit that raises a coverage issue, which is why we always go back to, you'd have to read each allegation. But again, assuming that there were none, you know, that there would be a defense that would be provided, you know, and we would try to, you know, defend it on the merits of the case. Again, starting with, if this at the renewal, you know, January 1st with the exclusion, you know, the insurer would take a look at the wording of the exclusion. They may involve coverage counsel as well, but there may be a determination that just based on the allegations, again, this is starting on 1/1, that there's no obligation to defend, even from the get-go. Again, that may end up being the source of other, you know, coverage litigation down the road as well, you know, where courts look at it. But it may be the case where starting 1/1 that there's no defense if the claim is based on something that triggers that exclusion in the communicable disease exclusion.
So this is a good one. And this is the question that just came in, Stephen. I appreciate that, because this was my question to these guys back in September. How are all of these members going to deal with municipalities that require proof of coverage for COVID? And I think I know the answer, and it's municipalities are always going to put obstacles in everybody's way. But I'd like to, you know, hear some feedback from, you know, Jason and Bill, maybe Dan.
So, you know, again, it's hard to say. Each municipality may have a risk manager or risk, you know, management department. You know, it's hard to say what each and every, you know, requirement might look like. You know, unfortunately, if there is the explicit requirement of having COVID coverage for an event to be permitted, then unfortunately we would not be able to meet those requirements next year. Now, having said that, I think permitting agencies or municipalities will certainly start to notice a reduction in the events taking place in their area if they're requiring a coverage that, you know, virtually nobody can obtain. You know, again, as Phil alluded to, we're not the only market that is in an exclusionary position when it comes to this. In fact, you know, we're seeing it pretty much across the board. So while, you know, the potential for that to happen is real, and I don't think I have, you know, the best answer for that. I mean, again, if it's going to be required, unfortunately, we would not have that. So, but having said that, I think it's, again, another area of the entire, you know, newness and fluid situation of the pandemic itself that, you know, risk managers may ask for the sun, moon, and the stars from, you know, a prospective event holder. And then as they start to realize they cannot get all those things, you know, we're hopeful that they will, you know, sort of see the light or adjust their requirements. Another thing that may play in our favor is if the vaccines, you know, come out and they're successful, maybe, you know, again, the local risk manager at a XYZ, you know, city or county will be less restrictive when it comes to having that coverage in place. So, you know, it's certainly in the short term could present an issue. I mean, there's no way around that. That is the question that I believe has driven this entire call. You know, and again, unfortunately, as it stands, you know, we are in a mandatory exclusion position with our carrier partner, and you know, but we're hopeful that as things play out a little bit, you know, the municipalities get a little more wise to the situation. Or again, if you're asking for something that people cannot give you, then, you know, at some point you would believe that they would adjust that. You know, the loss of revenue that, you know, a venue or a municipality may see because of the lack of events, you know, could play into that as well. But yeah, as far as if there is a situation where you have a very rigid requirement for or there to be no exclusion for COVID, you know, the unfortunate reality is after the renewal, we would not have that coverage in place. So I know it's it's a pressure point for everybody. I certainly am appreciative of that. I know it's easy for me to say, well, can you just find another venue? But and sometimes that may not be the case. I completely understand that. But again, we're just at this position with Nationwide where, you know, this is their position on the issue. And as Trent and Terry alluded to, in the standard market, you know, a lot of organizations are facing a similar, you know, coverage position, you know, as it relates to their business and operations as well. So, you know, again, if you see that as a requirement, you know, as the mandatory, you know, I don't know, you know, again, it all depends on who it is and where they're at. You know, sometimes folks are, I've worked with Margaret on many individual issues where a risk manager was being a little unrealistic or unreasonable. Sometimes, you know, those things are play out to, you know, satisfactory. Sometimes they do not. So again, it's, you know, on a case-by-case basis, you know, it's tough to say, but I know the one example that was shared with us, the Washington, D.C. event, I mean, if they were to be adamant about that, you know, unfortunately, we would not have that coverage in place.
So Jason, is that something that maybe we can work on to put together a little like fact sheet that we can share with members to, you know, take to their risk managers for a reasonable dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it just, you know, if there would, I'm not sure what you mean exactly by a fact sheet, Gene, but if there was
something we can work offline to, you know, to put some talking points together that members can then, you know, go and have a reasonable conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, about like, you know, is that an unreasonable request to, you know, have proof of COVID coverage?
Right. You know, and I think some of so Lee is, you know, our loss control manager. He's working on some running event procedures that, again, that could be another tool for, you know, if you got an event who's running into that hurdle, to be able to take that to the risk manager and say, look, I mean, we're following all the guidelines of the local state, and, you know, we're going through these procedures, we're being as mindful as we can, you know, as the situation. You know, again, you may get somebody to say, okay, you know, you're fine. You know, again, it's hard to say across the board how each risk management department or manager would react, but, you know, I have seen over time that, you know, that you can persuade folks to bless things that initially were deemed to be, you know, a no. So.
Yeah, everybody who's put on events knows sometimes you got to bring your permitting agents into reason.
Well, I imagine everyone saw back with the, you know, with the traditional unaggregated policy form. I'm sure everyone's fielded a million questions about that. You know, just something as simple as that. It just goes to show you, you know, that, you know, again, things can be worked out a lot of times if there's just some dialogue and some, you know, communication.
And I would say, Gene, I would say that.
Trent, you're in a weird void. There you go. Oh, well, Trent's getting unmuted. One of the questions that came up, which I think is a good question, since this has been a very COVID-centric conversation, that for the policy, COVID, like not, if you had any other claim that, you know, within kind of normal operations, normal types of things that we see at events, there's no other change to the policy besides that. So somebody trips and falls, sign falls on somebody's head, you know, car gets on course, all of those types of incidents are still part of the policy. So, you know, really there's no major changes to the policy besides this issue of dealing with the pandemic and insurance need to, you know, set a limit on COVID claims by excluding it. So Trent, I'll go back to you to hop in.
I was just going to say, sorry, I think it's because I'm going to have to X out. Hang a sec.
Okay.
Hey, Gene.
Yes.
This is Terry. I think one of the things, and I think we need to get Lee involved in this, you know, especially from developing a waiver, developing, you know, guidelines that the clubs can use if they do decide to have events. But, you know, I think one of the things that we probably haven't touched on yet right now, and I've been asked this question mainly from the Fort Wayne running club, is a situation as to how the directors and officers liability coverage applies. And, that was a real important topic in Fort Wayne, where they were just getting ready to host a holiday run here in Fort Wayne. And I talked with board members several times prior to the event. And, this COVID exclusion not only applies in the general liability arena, but it also applies in the directors and officers arena. So, I mean, all of our boards are at risk that if they decide to go ahead and put on an event, that, if somebody comes back and says, hey, I got COVID because I ran that event, and you approved the event, and I'm going to file a claim against the board of directors, that's going to be an excluded loss, just like it is in the general liability policy. One of the things in talking to the local running club was, you've got a couple lawyers on your board, have them, if you still want to have the event, do everything you can from a waiver standpoint to try to, push that liability away from the directors and the officers. Lee, maybe you'd like to jump in here a little bit. I mean, you're the loss control guy. Maybe you have some ideas that, as these clubs, if they do decide to go ahead and have an event, ways they can at least try to semi-protect themselves.
Oh, sorry.
Sure, Terry. First off, my degree is very, very far removed from a law degree. So in terms of speaking to waiver and release, number one, you guys already have put together a waiver and release that's on your webpage. And I'd say that's an excellent first step. Where I'm looking for things in these are in your planning stages for your events. You need to examine what you have done in the past. Look at those legacy documents that you have, and then amend those into a COVID exposure response, if you will. Everybody's putting on these events and doing other things, but now you're going to have to look at distancing requirements, initial disinfection requirements, ongoing disinfection requirements, those kind of things during the event. And the big word that comes after that is document. Document everything you do to make your participants as safe as possible from this COVID exposure. Having said that, the World Health Organization has rules, the CDC has rules, the state has rules, and it has now gotten down to the point where individual cities and individual counties are enacting their own rules in terms of gatherings. In the last couple of days, things in Indiana have declined to the point where we are now under new mandates for what can be done in a group event. They have greatly, greatly reduced the number of people that can participate in a group event. Easy as that. So when you're planning your event, you've got to be sensitive to look into what is happening, where your event will take place. That's the key, to have that in place, that you're following those rules, and then using those legacy documents to begin your COVID response, if you will, of the disinfection, your distancing, and then ongoing things, and then get documents with those. That's what makes you defensible in my mind. Again, I am not an attorney. My degree is much different. Dan can speak to the waiver things. Jason can speak to the waiver things. But from my standpoint, it is sort of changing your planning, amending your planning to add the COVID things. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, Lee, let me ask you, as we kind of work through this, because there's a variety of things that people are doing, and we're seeing them in other industries, like some of the healthcare facilities, asking questionnaires, doing temperature checks. I saw someone, I wanted to pull my hair out. They're like, should we actually partner with somebody and do COVID testing at a race? And I'm like, no, terrible idea. How do those types of things impact possible liability?
Again, that's kind of a claims question versus a loss control question.
Okay.
I will say that you have every right to ask your participants to not show up if they've got any symptoms. If they're symptomatic at all, sorry, this is not your year for the event. Come back next year, we'll be happy to have you. That's on the onus on the participants. From your side of things, if you decide to do temperature checks, that's just something you can do with a handheld scanner or a mass scanner, if you will. And again, that's something you've done to identify someone who may be carrying COVID, if you will. But then you have to go to the next step as, what do you do when you detect somebody that's got the high temperature? Then all of a sudden you've become the medical establishment. And I don't think that's anything that that you want to get into very deeply. Again, it's a screening thing, and if you can turn people around, fine. But if someone says, I'm going to continue to be at the event after you have detected a high temperature, that's a whole other, scenario. But Dan or Dean can answer the thing about the liability stuff. Dan,
you want to hop in?
Yeah, with regards to, I lost track of that. With regards to
just some of the, the screening questions, how much would you put in a race registration? Do you do like a pre-race questionnaire, doing temperature checks, those types of things?
Well, I mean, I think just anything that you do that shows that you're taking steps to, to be prepared or to address these questions ahead of time would just be things that the defense attorney could use, again, assuming that you have a covered loss, but that there are things that they could use in demonstrating that you acted reasonably. Because I think that's one of the big things is going to be, did the steps and the precautions and the, in preparing the race, was it done in a reasonable manner? I think that if you, again, like Lee said, you probably don't want to get too deep into some of the medical side, but if you're taking these steps, because the one thing is that if you're not, and then if there's a event where people are catching it, they will say, well, you didn't do X, Y, and Z, that would have been easy steps to take, to potentially head this off. So, I mean, I would think, again, I'm not an attorney, but handling these cases, I know that defense counsels like when we are able to document all the steps that are taken and the precautions that are to show that, in holding this, that you are reasonable.
That's helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And that's something that, again, the documentation of what you have done in preparation for your event will be key in making you defensible and giving you a good defense standpoint.
With regards to the health side of it, the one claim that I have seen, I don't know that it's gone anywhere, is there's an allegation that the insured in this case was, had received notice that one of the participants in a particular sport, was COVID positive, and that they, started spreading this information. So, it's a whole other area when you're talking about like the health portability, the HIPAA laws and whatnot. So, I guess, as long as you keep confidentiality as well. Again, that one is so new, it's not really gone anywhere, but it's one where a participant says, you outed me and, and you were disclosing my medical stuff. So again, that's just another area to be mindful of. And that's probably more of a confidentiality.
All right, we've hit our hour. I'm kind of just peeking at the chat. Our goal obviously today was predominantly to cover the issue of COVID, the pandemic exclusion on the policy. We can give it a few seconds if people want to, if they have additional questions.
Dean, I just want to chime in on one. I did pick out a question from one of the members, as far as how would the exclusion apply only to an event, or if it's a training run amongst just club members. Again, unfortunately, the exclusion will be on the policy, so it would apply to any RRCA sanctioned event or activity. So anything that a club is doing, be it a full scale event or just the club members on a training run, the exclusion is going to apply to all of those things. So just so everyone's aware, it's not an event specific exclusion. It is a policy wide exclusion for any, again, road runner sanctioned event or activity. So that was one of the questions.
Great clarification. And somebody also asked, is it clubs getting sued or is it individuals? And, we always like to remind people the policy covers your organization and your volunteers that are engaged. So, the purpose of the policy is to cover your organization from a claim of liability. Now, if an individual gets named, which is extremely rare, and Dan, you can probably back me up on that. I think I've only seen it once in 15 years. I don't know if you've seen any more incidents, but the one that I'm aware of, it was one time a race director was also personally named and covered. But predominantly lawsuits get filed in the name of the organizing entity. And that's what the insurance is designed to cover. Like, people are always like, are my participants covered? And it's like, this is not about your participants. It's about your organization. It's about your entity and covering your entity from claims of negligence.
So just to jump on that, Gene, again, the terminology we would use, it's the deep pockets. Who has the deep pockets when it comes to litigating a potential issue, and oftentimes it's going to be the organizing entity, and then in turn the RRCA potentially themselves as the sanctioning body or the overall governing body of the member club. So as Gene said, individuals could certainly be included, but more often than not, it's going to be the organizing, or the organization that's putting on the event, because they're going to be deemed to have the insurance and the deep pockets, if you will.
Hey, Gene, real quick, I think the big thing is, with Dad and I and with Margaret, who you guys all know, I mean, we're partners with you guys. As these things come up, whether it's a risk manager for a city that's giving you a hard time, as these requests come up and you have things that happen, reach out to us. If we have to negotiate those things and have those conversations with those risk managers, we will. Again, they want everything and anything they can get. A lot of times the question just becomes, how about the city itself? Are you getting, COVID coverage through your own insurance policy? Sometimes it's simple questions like that, but we don't expect you guys to have the knowledge to have those conversations sometimes. So don't hesitate to reach out to Margaret or to Dad or I, and we'll step in and try and handle some of those. Our biggest goal is to allow you guys to have the events. We don't want to scare you out of doing that. We still want you guys to have those events. And we're going to do everything we can to make you guys feel as comfortable as possible to do those things moving forward into the next year.
And I would chime in that the K&K is of the exact same feeling. We're willing to assist Trent and Terry or Margaret through any, hurdles or, risk managers who aren't playing nice. And, it's certainly our desire for, RRCA clubs to have successful events and to get folks, back out and moving and, doing all those things. We do not want any of our insureds to scale back if they don't have to. We like for, the folks to be able to do the things that they're able, or have always been able to do. And for us, that's, we're certainly fall in line with Trent and Terry on that.
Gene, I think maybe we could finish everything by basically saying, I truly believe that the RRCA insurance program is the broadest, best insurance program in the amateur sports industry. A lot of that, of course, with your negotiations with us and putting this COVID thing aside, the RRCA is still being provided the broadest, best coverage, best pricing model, I think, in the industry. I believe this COVID thing is kind of a blip, and hopefully 6 months from now, a vaccine comes out and it changes the approach with this COVID thing. But I think that, the membership just needs to know that the COVID thing aside, we are still providing the RRCA the broadest protection, insurance protection they can have when they're putting on events out there. And I think that this is, as I said, hopefully this is just a little mountain we've got to climb, but aside from the COVID issue, the RRCA program is still a forerunner in the industry as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Terry. That's great to hear. I appreciate that. And hopefully, as everybody can see, that, you know, we do have a great working relationship, very open dialogue, myself, Mike, with Trent, Terry, Margaret at the IMG office. All the guys at K&K have always been great to work with. And, you know, they really understand our industry, which I think is so critical for all the members. And, you know, we really all do work together to try to put together the best policy that's, you know, reasonable under the insurance industry. So, you know, I think that's great too, that you guys can help, you know, kind of work with some of these risk managers where people may find some challenges. A couple of quick questions too. Someone had asked about virtual events, and essentially virtual events are just part of your overall event coverage. So as you start to think about 2021 and you're like, well, do we do virtual? Do we do hybrids? You know, Mike and I are here to definitely work with everybody through that, but that's just part of the overall policy. So it's not like a different policy. It all kind of falls under the operations of your organizations. So don't be like, oh, well, we're not doing a live event, so we have to get virtual event. That's not how ours is structured. It's all just part of that overall operations. Somebody had asked the question about when can you pay your insurance. We want to get that going as soon as possible. There are a lot of things going on in the background that we think by first quarter, people are going to be very happy with a lot of the work that we've been doing during our slow period. But for now, we had some updates that needed to be made in the database. And so, you know, if the planets align and everything works exactly in my favor, hopefully within the next week, that we can get things opened up for 2021. You know, it's just a few of those database updates sometimes take a little bit longer than you anticipated. And again, we had a lot of work, I think, with IMG and K&K to really understand our 2021 landscape. So, you know, that this process has taken longer than a normal operating year, but we'll get that going as soon as possible. So, again, if people are looking at January events, you know, work with Mike, we can get some things done, you know, kind of manually on the back end before we open up the membership system for, you know, serve yourself. But we're actively working on that. Let's see, club equipment. Okay, if the club rents equipment to a local church. Oh, so if you like rent cones or tables or things like that, could you get named in a lawsuit? I don't know where the negligence would come from. Maybe our K&K guys or Terry, you can hop in on that one about renting equipment to other organizations.
Yeah, personally, just in the example described, I mean, it's ultimately would be the church's event. If you're simply, you know, tables, chairs, cones, you know, whatever the equipment might be, at the end of the day, it's not the club's event, it's the church's event. So if the church was somehow in violation of a local state, you know, mandate, then, you know, I don't think you as the lesser of the chairs and tables would have any liability in that situation. It would be, you know, the church itself.
Right. If the claim was based solely on, oh, you held this against the state or city or county guidelines, you know, if you were holding, if they, you know, the issue I would see is if there was something defective or if one of the pieces of equipment you rented was, you know, failed, like chair broke or something, I suppose it could come back to us. But again, that wouldn't probably even be
it wouldn't even be a COVID,
a COVID related exclusion.
Yeah.
So you would have a defense, like whether you were at fault. But again, if the only claim is that you shouldn't have held it because it was against the state guidelines, I don't think you'd have really any liability. I would be only concerned if something was wrong with the equipment you rented to them.
And just as a best practice, if that's a common, you know, thing that takes place with any particular club, it's always best to have something spelled out on paper. I know contracts and agreements to, lease or rent somebody your chairs or your timing equipment maybe is a little, seems to be excessive, but just having, some documentation in place, that the person using the equipment is, using it for their event, and they would, assume any liabilities therein. I mean, those things are always going to be helpful in the event something were to happen with an actual claim. But yeah, on the surface, if it's just related to, like Dan said, the shutdown or this, the mandates of a particular municipality, then I don't think there would be any exposure from the club's perspective simply for providing, equipment for somebody else's event.
And here's a good question about, and it's a good reminder. We always used to say we cover running, and it can be on the road, track, or trails. But once you start jumping, throwing, or anytime water is involved, we're out. That's where we have to draw the line. So the question about, can you get insurance that would cover if you did a trail/kayak event? So we wouldn't cover for that event, obviously. But one of the things when you have some of those events that are, if you're trying to do kind of a hybrid duathlon type of thing, it's always good to check with Trent and Terry to see, are they able to, kind of work with you to, find a policy that might meet your needs. And always saying we're an RRCA member, and they understand that people do oftentimes beyond just running events. So, they may be able to point you in the right direction. So they're always a great resource. And then when I said, if you start jumping and throwing, historically, that's when the RRCA is out. But we also recognize moving into next year, and especially with a lot of the high school sports, there's so much unknown, and there is potential for clubs to provide, that athletic opportunity for maybe some high school athletes, at least to, do some competition. Even some of the masters groups, if you're not looking at records, if you're not, you just need to be clear, if you host those activities, they're probably not going to count for, any kind of high school championships, college championships. But we will have an option to do a special writing to cover for some field events and some jumping events. So long jump, triple jump, high jump, shot put, discus. But we're still not going to cover javelin, pole vault, and hammer throw, the kind of the higher risk activities in the field events. So, that might be something as you start doing some planning for next year and looking at, what is the landscape for your high school sports? Is there an opportunity to hold an exhibition meet for people to at least, get out and compete in a safe manner? So that will be something new that, we'll be able to offer for people. And just, again, this year is going to be, I think, just like between March and today, we're still all dealing with a lot of unknowns, all still trying to navigate through some uncharted waters. But, I think it's good to be cautiously optimistic, as people are planning. I think maybe we're seeing indications summer and fall might be better times. Like, don't be too ambitious first, second quarter. But, kind of track towards middle to end of 2021. And, hopefully that the world will be in a better state. We can all hope. Let's see, do we have, we're a little over our hour. So I think probably best to wrap it up now. Just as a reminder, we have been recording this. Andy's going to go and kind of pick out some critical conversations, and he'll put in, some timestamps for it. We'll make this available probably by Thursday, Friday. We have a bunch of meetings for the team the rest of the day, but we'll get the recording out so you can share it with leaders in your organization as you start having discussions. Because obviously you'll probably go, and after this you'll have 1,000 questions. So, we'll be here available, and we will make the chat available and make sure that we hit on as many questions as possible, and, put links from the website, because There's a lot of information in the website, but typically most of the common questions that get asked can be found in the website. So we'll make all of this available for everybody. So our K&K, IMG, Mike, Andy, you guys, anything else?
I think that's it on my end.
All right. Okay, well, look for a lot of information coming out from us, in the coming weeks. We wish everybody a happy and healthy and stay safe Thanksgiving. And, let's just all keep trying to work towards a better 2021.
Words to end on. Take care,
Yep.
everyone.
All right,
Thanks,
bye all.
everyone.
you.
Have
Thank
a
you.
great day.
Bye-bye.